controlling the high ground. It's been fundamental to warfare forever, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Since the first fortress on a hill.
Right, from ancient castles to, modern battlefields. Getting higher up always gives you that edge. But what happens when that high ground isn't actually ground? When it's orbit thousands of miles up in, well, the vacuum of space?
Yeah, it's a total shift, a complete paradigm shift for how we even think about conflict.
So,
Well, in space, traditional ideas about firepower, about just blowing things up, they often don't work. Or worse, they backfire. Satellites are more like pieces on this vast multidimensional chessboard.
so it's not about brute force.
Not really. That's the paradox, right? Winning in orbit isn't about big explosions. It's about strategy. It's about finesse. And it's definitely about unseen control over things that are, frankly, critical down here on Earth.
Okay, so that's exactly what we're digging into today. This deep dive is all about unpacking that evolving nature of conflict up there in orbit.
We'll look at the history, these new sort of gray zone tactics everyone's talking about.
The role of tech, like AI, which is huge.
Definitely. And what it all means for global power, for strategy.
So consider this your sort of inside analysis. We're putting on our military analyst hats to give you the comprehensive view.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so from the start of the space age, space was always seen as a vantage point, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was immediately recognized. Early on, it was about observation, deterrence, just being there.
Like the Corona program.
Exactly. The U.S. Corona program, those early spy satellites, they were, well, revolutionary. Silently orbiting, watching everything. Troop movements, missile sites, key infrastructure, all revealed from hundreds of miles up. A total game changer for intelligence.
And at the same time, you had the missile warning systems.
Right. The Soviet OCO system, America's DSP Satellites Defense Support Program, their job was basically to be the tripwire for nuclear war. Detect a launch, guarantee retaliation. That was the grim reality holding the line during the Cold War.
But there was this initial idea, wasn't there, to keep space peaceful? The Outer Space Treaty in '67.
There was. And, looking back, it feels a bit naive, maybe. It banned nukes in orbit, military bases on the moon.
It really reflected that 20th century view of war. Big, obvious conflict, clear battle lines.
But that idealism didn't last long. By the 80s, things got more kinetic. Both the U.S. and the Soviets started openly testing ASAT's anti-satellite weapons.
Kinetic meaning physical destruction.
Precisely. The U.S. actually launched a missile, the ASM-135, from an F-15 fighter jet. Hit a satellite, bang.
Wow.
And the Soviets, they were working on co-orbital systems even earlier, back in the late 60s. Satellites designed to get close to another satellite and, well, take it out, brute force.
Okay, but here's where it gets really tricky, right? Blowing things up in space isn't like blowing things up on Earth. There's a major consequence.
You hit the nail on the head. Space debris, it's the critical problem.
Explain that. The Kessler syndrome.
Right. Donald Hessler, a NASA scientist, theorized this back in the 70s. Basically, one satellite gets destroyed, it creates shrapnel. That shrapnel hits another satellite, creates more shrapnel.
A chain reaction.
Exactly, a cascading chain of collisions. And it could potentially create so much debris that entire orbits become unusable for everyone. It's not just theory anymore. It's a real risk we face after tests like the ones China and Russia have done.
So destroying an enemy satellite kinetically could actually end up hurting you too.
It absolutely could. You might deny your enemy an asset, sure, but you risk cutting off access to vital orbital highways for yourself, for commercial companies, even for things like the International Space Station. It's indiscriminate. And think about attribution. If debris takes out multiple satellites, who do you blame? How do you respond?
Which means the whole focus has to shift from destruction
to disruption, exactly. That's the modern playbook.
So if kinetic attacks are too messy, what are the options? What does disruption look like?
It looks like non-kinetic capabilities, things that don't leave physical wreckage. Think cyberattacks targeting satellite control systems.
Yeah.
Signal jamming. Disabling sensors.
So achieving the same goal, making the satellite useless, but without the debris cloud.
Precisely. For instance, you could use directed energy, lasers maybe, from the ground or another satellite to just sort of dazzle or degrade an imagery satellite sensors, blind it without destroying it.
And jamming.
Jamming is a big one. Russia, for example, has really sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. They test systems to disrupt satellite signals, affecting things both in orbit and on the ground. You've got uplink jamming, targeting the signal going up to the satellite. That takes huge power. It's expensive, mostly a state-level thing, but it can affect a wide area.
And downlink.
Downlink jamming, hitting the signal coming down, that's much cheaper, easier. It's been a persistent nuisance for militaries for years. But here's the thing. Even these non-kinetic methods, cyber jamming, they're still relatively detectable, right? You can often figure out who's doing it.
Still kind of fits that older model of conflict.
Exactly. The really modern stuff, the cutting edge of orbital warfare, it's much harder to see, much more ambiguous.
Which brings us to this idea of silent choreography. What does that mean in practice?
It means getting your pieces in the right place on the board before your opponent even realizes a game is being played, positioning assets, maybe even potentially threatening ones, without any overt hostile action.
Creating strategic ambiguity.
That's the key. Cloaking military intent behind what looks like normal civilian or commercial space activity. It lets nations maneuver, posture, gain advantage, all while staying below the threshold of what might trigger a response. It shifts decision-making too, makes things happen faster, maybe too fast for humans to react effectively.
And China seems to be particularly adept at this blurring of lines.
Very much so. Their government, their military, their commercial space sector, the lines are intentionally blurry. Any capability their civilian side develops could potentially be used for military advantage.
I remember seeing that quote from former NASA Administrator Bill Nelson back in April 24. He said, "We believe that a lot of China's so-called civilian space program is a military program."
And I think, in effect, we are in a race. Yeah, I saw that too.
And General Saltzman, head of Space Force, he echoed that concern later in the year, didn't he? Worried about the sheer speed China's moving at and the variety of space weapons they seem to be developing.
The speed is definitely notable. Look at their progress. Reusable rockets, commercial launch sites popping up, their own Starlink-like constellations planned. And it's not just potential dual use. Remember the U.S. sanctions on Chinese satellite imagery firms.
We're helping the Wagner Group in Ukraine, right?
Exactly. Commercial assets directly feeding into a conflict zone. That's not theoretical dual use. That's active military support via commercial means.
So how is the U.S. responding to this? Are we playing the same game?
The U.S. is definitely developing its own ways to leverage commercial space, but maybe in a more open way. General Whiting at Space Command talked about their commercial integration cell growing.
What does that do?
It's basically a hub for sharing info. Private companies with satellites can share data imagery or even alerts about electronic interference they're seeing directly with the military. It's about better situational awareness.
And then there was that Air Force contract for orbital warehouses.
Right, that's fascinating. A contract with a startup to develop these depots in orbit. The idea is storing cargo up there and being able to deploy it anywhere on Earth within 30 minutes.
Cargo-like.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It remains undefined, but it absolutely highlights this dual-use trend. Is it for disaster relief, logistics, military supplies? It could be anything. And that ambiguity is central to this gray zone concept. Commercial and military roles are becoming almost indistinguishable.
It really changes the nature of warfare analysis. Why is orbital conflict so fundamentally different? You mentioned satellites can't just dodge.
Exactly. That's a critical point. A jet fighter can jink, a tank can maneuver. Satellites, their paths are governed by orbital mechanics, by physics. Making even small changes takes planning, fuel, time. You can't just react instantly.
So conflicts have to be fought differently, more subtly.
Much more subtly. Think about that space war game they ran recently. DoD, State Department, NASA, Intel folks, all involved.
What happened there?
The role players acting as China didn't launch missiles. Instead, they quietly moved some civilian spacecraft onto trajectories that, well, happened to put them very close to critical U.S. military satellites, PNT, comms.
Just a coincidence, of course.
Of course. And then they quickly launched a few cheap, disposable bodyguard satellites to screen their own assets. All under the banner of peaceful space development. No shots fired, no overt threats.
But they achieved a strategic position.
They achieved a fait accompli. An irreversible situation set up weeks, maybe months, before anyone on the ground even got solid indications something was up. The advantage was gained long before it became obvious. That's the silent choreography.
Okay, so if it's all about subtle moves and seeing things others don't, where does artificial intelligence fit in? Seems crucial.
Oh, absolutely critical. AI is potentially the key advantage in this gray zone. Why? Because it can sift through mountains of data sensor readings, orbital tracks, communication signals, and spot patterns, anomalies that humans would just miss.
Finding the signal in the noise.
Exactly, providing that vital early warning. The U.S. Space Force knows this. They're working on software called R2C2.
Rapid and resilient command and control.
Right. The whole point is to automate a lot of the grunt work, threat detection, pulling data together, even routine satellite operations. Human analysts are just swamped otherwise. General Saltzman put it bluntly, AI can collect all the data, process the data, and tell the analyst what's most high priority. It frees up humans to make the actual decisions.
And this isn't just about managing things in space, right? AI on the satellite itself has implications for down here.
Big time. Imagine AI onboard an imagery satellite. Instead of just sending raw pictures down, which then take time to analyze, the AI processes the imagery in real time, right there in orbit.
What does that let you do?
It lets you spot changes instantly. Distinguish normal activity from, say, military vehicles massing or unusual construction. Think back to corona analysis took days. Now, AI could potentially flag something significant in seconds. That speed gives decision makers a massive advantage. It's about creating what some call cognitive overmatch, seeing and understanding the battle space faster and better than your opponent. Weaponizing intelligence, essentially.
And safe to assume the U.S. isn't the only one pursuing this.
Definitely not. China's National Space Administration is heavily invested in AI, too. They're developing it for satellite image analysis, just like the U.S., and also for tracking space debris.
Which, again, sounds like a dual-use capability.
Precisely. An AI good at tracking tiny pieces of junk is also potentially very good at tracking other satellites, adversarial ones included. And the Pentagon's own reports on China confirm this. They highlight China using AI with its spy satellites to track forces on the ground, improving targeting for their missiles.
So the race for AI dominance in space is almost as important as the race for physical position in orbit. It's a core technological factor.
You could argue it's more important now. It underpins everything else. You know, it's interesting drawing historical parallels. During the Cold War, we basically adapted Earth-based military tech for space.
Right, making radios work in vacuum, hardening electronics.
Exactly. But now, today, the U.S. and China are developing technologies specifically for orbital warfare, technologies designed to have effects back on Earth. It's a different dynamic.
And the private sector's role is new, too. These space companies. You'd call them a militia-like reserve.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. They develop these amazing dual-use technologies, primarily for the commercial market, but they're inherently capable of supporting national security objectives. It adds another layer of complexity to the whole geopolitical picture.
So AI isn't some future concept here. It's active, it's being integrated now.
It's absolutely here now. It's an essential tool, and it's constantly evolving. As the U.S. and China integrate AI deeper into their space operations, the stakes just keep getting higher. Protecting your own AI, maybe disrupting your adversaries, that becomes paramount.
It really feels like a second space race.
It is, but maybe not to the moon this time. This race is about quietly commanding the orbits that ultimately shape power down here on Earth.
Okay, so let's wrap this deep dive up for you. The big picture. Orbital warfare has changed. It's less about explosions, more about calculated positioning, keeping intentions unclear.
Making preemptive moves that often go unnoticed until it's way too late. It's all silent maneuvers.
And success in this gray zone, as we've discussed, isn't really about having more firepower.
No, it's about foresight. It's about precision. It's about achieving dominance, maybe, without ever needing an open confrontation. That's the strategic goal.
So here's a final thought for you to take away. Next time you look up at the night sky, remember that the biggest power struggles might not be happening with loud rockets or declared wars anymore.
They could be playing out silently right now, with unseen satellites and sophisticated AI, jockeying for position long before any conflict becomes public knowledge.
And given how much our daily lives depend on space, GPS, communication, what does this quiet high-tech arms race really mean for global stability and for you? Something to think about.